So scenario 3, we want to take a look at a particular label and look at the various reasons that you might want to go into the particular version history. So on the next slide, we should see some of those reasons that you might want to do that. So this, by the way, could occur anytime you have an approval. You want to make sure that particular version is published and that the version is correct. And it's not uncommon. You might find it in your particular setting where there's a lot of versions of a label that are being discussed, and the authoring process has many different versions and approvals and so on. In some cases, you might have multiple labels in review with the FDA simultaneously. And you might have some clauses and sections updated in one version, and another version you might have other sections being updated. So there's a little bit of possibility for confusion here, and many times you come down to the end, it's like, okay, well, which particular version are we going to submit and get approved? Once that's done, you definitely want to make sure that that particular label is what was actually published sent to the FDA and published now in the National Library of Medicine. So one of those use cases would be just to make sure whatever version that you had targeted did in fact get published. And that's actually starts at the very first version. So you have this question anytime you do a publication. Now, it's also very valuable to take a look at what are the changes over the course of time. So there's some evolutionary changes and modifications to a particular label. If you look at all of them, consecutively, and there's other types of interests that you might have for that. Not only the wording that was used at a certain point in a version, but also for a particular point of time. So many times there's regulatory or even legal reasons that you need to establish what was the published version at this particular time, in date and time of a particular year, of a month, of a day. Sometimes it becomes very important down for legal purposes to identify what you actually had been published out, what you actually have published out to the public at that point in time. Now, there's also another side little scenario here. As we've been working with labels over the years, there's definitely this issue about assigning NDC numbers. And some NDC numbers are used, and if it's all inside a single entity, hopefully there's good master listing of those particular product codes and also packaging codes that are used in your NDC to make sure that's in place. The NDC directory has a resource to check on that. But in some cases, you might have a contract manufacturer and a private label distributor working in tandem to bring products to the market. And now, many times the contract manufacturer takes it upon themselves, or they've been delegated to assign NDC numbers. And we have seen some issues where they assign a number that has been previously used, or it might be currently in use, and it just didn't resolve that. But that is a problem in that once you do come up with an NDC number, if you was previously used, now you're going to reject when you go to list that product. So that is another use case that we want to touch on when we talk about label version. So David, I'm going to turn this back over to you. The FDA obviously has some repositories that would be available. And then if you want to talk about being able to look at the versions and compare versions, so you might have to have a comparison between version 2 and 3 or 2 and 5 or whatever. And then there might be some version value in being able to compare your particular version that you want to bring out as a generic and compare that to the reference listed drug label. So that is a very valuable comparison. And then, anything that you might propose as brand new, uploading that particular draft version is not yet published, but a draft version, and then doing a comparison to something that's already published. So, David, let's take a look at some of those scenarios in the next few slides.
Absolutely. And these are the types of questions we're constantly asked, right? And even that, think of it from a perspective of establishing that number two, the evolution changes of a label, right? If it's a transient industry we work in, right? Yeah, today Jane Doe's here, tomorrow she's there. John Doe's here, now he's in Germany working there, and it's crazy. When new members of the team join, yeah, they can try to filter through our document management systems and see all of this evolution to understand the labels. Or with Navigator, a user can immediately see what has been listed, what has been approved through step by step. We'll show that in a minute. And Gary, you'd mentioned number 4, a small issue or problem. Tell that to our friends in the over-the-counter industries that are CMOs that work with some of the largest brick and mortar private label distributors, especially if you don't have a tool like Navigator to confirm. Is that NDC code we selected one that we can have confidence in, right? Or that code that they gave us, is that going to work, right? Because hey, it's the Wild West out there sometimes with OTC products, and like you had mentioned, a CMO might work with a PLD and a PLD vice versa. A lot of these huge companies that are in the Fortune 500 list of these distributors sometimes worth like hundreds of CMOs. So it can get very complicated on how these NDC codes are being managed. And what we found is Navigators are a very good resource for that. Now, FDA provides resources as well. However, some of the toughest and most challenging aspects to it, right? You could do a drug name search, right? You could do an NDC code search. You can use FDA label. I'd even put up here DailyMed and the NDC directory, but they don't always paint the full picture because it's difficult to search the archives and seeing the entire history, right? So if a product has been delisted, and that stool softener that ABC company was distributing at one point no longer distributes the version that manufacturer made, that code can't be used anymore, right? So finding that code's difficult. Now, going back to that concept with the human prescription side, it's the same idea, right? Same issue lies where a lot of the times what we're viewing, we don't always see the historical perspective on these, or it's not easy to find the historical data. And that's really where Navigator, when it comes to this kind of looking at history, if you will, label history, or even product history, what was on the market, what has this distributor distributed, it makes it a lot easier, right? Navigating through this information and finding and honing in on what's correct, what have we seen, painting that full picture, Navigator really helps with that. So we've talked already about that concept of searching, right? Having the ability to then create the save search. So if I'm, let's think on that last topic of the OTC manufacturer or someone confirming an NDC code. Yes, the FDA now has the ability to reserve an NDC code, but if you're trying to reserve an NDC code that has already been used, it's not going to work, right? So being able to create a save search on a labeler code number that when you then pull the results will allow you to see every code that's been utilized is a very powerful tool at your fingertips. And then you can quickly and easily with confidence start either reserving those codes or even starting the drug listing process. Now, finding all versions of these labels and time intervals. When were they drug listed, right? On the human prescription side, many of these drug listings that are in SPL going to the agency are because these labels have been approved, and now it's time to drug list. So being able to compare these versions, identify what has changed for historical kind of reference to professionals, labeling professionals, or even researchers is very, very helpful. So again, I had touched upon earlier the ability to use the label track on the left in the circle here. So right now I'm doing a little bit of a different search, right? This is on COVID-19 under indications and usage. Again, I'd mentioned earlier that idea of that there are some companies out there that are putting that in their OTC drug label. I'm no attorney, but I don't know if I do that. Moving forward, what we've selected now in our label track allows us to have the ability for for Navigator to notify me anytime there's been an update or a change, right? So if I have said, all right, notify me when the current version that's on Daily Med of the emergency use authorization of Janssen's COVID-19 vaccine, right? Anytime there's been an update made in a drug listing perspective, Navigator pings you and lets you know. So from there, now this is using a different example through a different product that has multiple versions and more of another COVID product, but a more specific kind of set number of versions that I can look through is seeing here. Now I'm looking at the label, right? This is the view of what the label looks like. There's essentially a detail or a table of contents where we can fast track right to the information. Down at product listings is where we'll see the metadata, and then up above is where we can click into all the various sections of the label. What this is now showing us is up at the top or of that previous view where I've selected the versions that I'd like to view side by side. And then when I click through, even my own label, I can now look at them, see the versions, the dates, and I can even select sections of the label that I'd like to compare instead of the entire label. But again, we can synchronize the scroll. So as I scroll down, it will show me all three of them scrolling at the same time, or I can deselect that so I can look through them separately. And fast forwarding through, this is where I can then go and do a highlighted comparison of two different labels. So while with the compare function, we can view many labels side by side, with the highlighted comparison, it allows me to look at version 1 versus version 2, and then see what are the differences, what's been inserted, what's been deleted. So we see here very specifically the textual comparison of what's been changed. So it's a helpful, useful tool.
David,
Gary,
can I interrupt just a second there, David? You might want to highlight some of the color flags for the insertion and deletions, to help identify these changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So like as we see here, this is a screenshot, but it's showing us anywhere there may have been either content inserted or deleted from one version to the next. Another thing is just like with any web-based application, you can do a find, right? Control find. So if there's specific content you'd like to look for, Control F, type in the term, and then you can start searching through as well to each of the terms. So it's definitely helps streamline that review of, okay, what was different, what wasn't. You can print this information so you can export the comparison, just like you can export the side-by-side view of all the various labels you may be looking at. So it's not just limited to, oh, I have this information and it's all in Navigator. You can export either a print viewable version of these, or with the compare label function that we were looking at back here, if we had done the export function right here, that's a not just like a static kind of print PDF type image. This is actually an export that can be annotated and edited